Welcome back to Sera's Werewolf Romance collection, where the alphas are cocky, but the heroines always put them in their place. Quick question for the pack before we dive into today's drama. Where in the world are you listening from right now? Let me know in the comments and drop a clipboard emoji if you love a fiercely competent heroine who refuses to back down. Today we have a fantastic rom-com. It's tense, it's hilarious, and it involves a highly practical tactical auditor who just rated the Alpha King's kissing technique a miserable 6 out of 10. His response? He locks the door to practice. But before we start the timer, if you want to support the channel and get early access to high-stakes romance stories just like this, hit that join button down below. It helps keep the channel running and the werewolf banter coming. Now, take a deep breath, get comfortable. The audit has officially begun, and the king's ego is in serious trouble. Let's read. Chapter 1. The lavish royal office was intensely warm, courtesy of the modern gas fireplace running silently against the far wall. Operated strictly by a sleek, brushed metal wall switch, the appliance provided steady heat without a single glowing ember to tend or stoke. The sprawling room was dominated by a massive oak desk. Across its polished surface lay a sprawling parchment tactical map, a thick ceramic mug filled to the brim with dark coffee, and a top drawer left slightly ajar, revealing a pristine stack of heavy paper napkins. Isabelle Fletcher stood rigidly in the center of the plush rug, her posture military straight. She wore her standard tactical gear, charcoal gray cargo pants, a fitted navy Henley, and sturdy, scuff-resistant combat boots. She tapped her silver, engraved tactical pen against the wooden clipboard she had carried in from her slate blue Jeep. "Your eastern border patrols are dangerously negligent, Daniel," Isabelle stated, her voice perfectly steady. "Your guards overlap their routes, leaving a 2-mile gap exposed every 3 hours. It is a precarious vulnerability." King Daniel leaned casually against the edge of his massive desk. He wore a deep plum 3-piece suit that radiated immense power and authority. His silver signet ring caught the light as he crossed his arms, the monogrammed cotton handkerchief tucked neatly into his breast pocket, remaining perfectly crisp. His presence was formidable, smelling strongly of warm mahogany and clove. "I am the reigning Alpha King," Daniel thought, fighting a sudden sharp spike of irritation in his chest. "I have dismantled entire rogue factions, yet this Delta treats me like a failing cadet." "My guards are the finest in the hemisphere," Daniel replied, keeping his tone deceptively smooth. "They mitigate that gap with advanced scent markers. You are analyzing this strictly by the book, Delta. You lack spatial imagination." "Spatial imagination does not intercept a coordinated ambush," Isabelle countered smoothly, her sweet jasmine and crushed blackberry scent remaining perfectly composed. "If he tells me to reconsider my methodology one more time, I might actually throw my tactical pen at his perfectly tailored shoulder," Isabelle thought, maintaining her neutral expression. She smoothed the front of her jacket to hide her growing amusement at his tangible frustration. The tension in the room crackled, thickening the air. Daniel pushed off the desk, stalking slowly toward her. He towered over her, fully expecting her to yield the space, but Isabelle held her ground. She did not flinch, nor did her breathing accelerate. "You are relentlessly stubborn," Daniel murmured, his voice dropping to a dangerous, compelling register. "I am pragmatic," she corrected, refusing to break eye contact. "I synthesize facts. You rely on arrogance." Daniel had heard enough. He wanted to shatter her pristine equilibrium. Without a single warning, he reached out, tangling his hand gently but firmly in the hair at the nape of her neck, and pulled her flush against his chest. His mouth crashed down on hers in a kiss designed to completely short-circuit her logical brain. It was demanding, highly skilled, and thoroughly commanding. Her pulse thrummed a rapid, steady rhythm against her collarbone, but she refused to melt into the floor. When Daniel finally pulled back, his chest heaving slightly, a triumphant gleam sparkled in his dark eyes. He waited for her breathless surrender. Isabelle blinked once. She reached up, smoothed her jacket a second time, and offered a tiny, almost imperceptible shrug. 6 out of 10, she whispered, stepping back. A bit rushed. The technique lacks focus. I have commanded the loyalty of thousands, Daniel thought, staring at her in sheer, unadulterated disbelief. I will conquer this rating if it is the last thing I do. His pride took a catastrophic blow. The Alpha King stared at her for a long, silent moment. Then, without uttering a single word, he turned his back. He strode directly to the heavy oak doors, reached for the manual sliding brass lock on the inside panel, and shoved it home. The loud metallic click echoed through the quiet room, sealing them inside. 6 out of 10? Daniel challenged, reaching up to aggressively unbutton his cuffs. We are clearing your schedule, Isabelle. We're practicing until it's a 10. Chapter 2. The heavy brass lock gleamed mockingly under the warm glow of the room's crystal chandelier. Isabelle watched Daniel aggressively roll his sleeves up to his elbows, exposing thick forearms corded with prominent muscle. The revered king of the Allied Pax was officially pouting, treating a mediocre performance review like an act of high treason. I should probably be intimidated by the locked door, Isabelle thought, carefully tucking her wooden clipboard under her arm. But watching him unravel over a number is frankly the most entertaining audit I have ever conducted. You grated me, Daniel said, his voice laced with a dark, competitive edge. He paced slowly around his large oak desk, closing the physical distance between them once more. A 6. You claim my technique lacks focus. Articulate the flaw, Delta. Your fundamental stance was structurally flawed, Isabelle supplied helpfully. She raised her silver tactical pen, pointing it toward his chest like an instructor wielding a pointer. You led with your dominant shoulder. It projected dominance, yes, but it completely bypassed the nuanced balance required for a truly remarkable connection. You were trying to intimidate, not collaborate. Daniel halted right in front of her. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathering near his ear. She is critiquing my biomechanics, Daniel realized, a potent mix of severe frustration and undeniable fascination blooming in his chest. I am trapped in a room with a beautiful madwoman. Then correct my stance, he demanded softly, reaching out to lightly grip her waist. His touch was warm, sending a quiet tremor through her uniform. Isabelle did not step away. She placed her hands flat against his firm chest, adjusting his shoulders a fraction of an inch to the left. The proximity sent a sudden electric thrill down her spine, but she forcefully maintained her clinical demeanor. She was a professional tactical auditor. She operated on a strict, immovable scale, and she refused to lose her focus to a handsome ruler. Daniel leaned in, his intense gaze dropping deliberately to her lips. The air grew dense, the rich scent of warm mahogany wrapping completely around her senses. Suddenly, a loud, frantic scratching sound erupted from the side door that led to Daniel's private quarters. Before Daniel could even voice a groan of protest, the heavy latch gave way. The door swung open, and a massive shadow lumbered into the opulent office. It was Max. The direwolf was the size of a small horse, covered in thick, silver-tipped fur, possessing a jaw lined with teeth like serrated daggers. By all accounts, he was the most fearsome creature residing in the royal palace. Max took one look at the intense, quiet scene, let out a pathetic, high-pitched whine that sounded like a frightened puppy, and trotted directly toward Isabelle. The giant beast collapsed dramatically onto the expensive rug right at her scuff-resistant combat boots, rolling onto his back and exposing his fluffy belly for immediate affection. My terrifying royal guard is a massive, embarrassing traitor, Daniel thought, dropping his hands from Isabelle's waist and rubbing the bridge of his nose in defeat. He possesses zero dignity and terrible timing. Isabelle instantly dropped her wooden clipboard onto the edge of the desk and knelt down, a bright, genuine smile breaking across her sharp features. She scratched the giant wolf vigorously behind his large ears. Max thumped his heavy tail against the floorboards, making the entire room vibrate. "Well, look at you," Isabelle cooed softly, completely ignoring the deeply frustrated king standing above them. "At least someone in this castle knows how to ask nicely for attention." Chapter 3. Daniel stood frozen, watching the notoriously strict Delta tactical auditor happily rub the belly of his supposedly terrifying direwolf. The intense, locked-room tension had completely evaporated, derailed entirely by a 300-pound canine demanding unearned affection. "Get up, Max," Daniel ordered, pointing firmly at the patterned rug. "You are completely undermining my authority." Max huffed a loud breath, his silver-tipped tail thumping against Isabelle's combat boots, and deliberately squeezed his eyes shut. He listens to no one but himself, Daniel thought, letting out a long, weary sigh. I am rapidly losing control of my own territory, starting with this office. Isabelle gave Max one last, affectionate scratch before standing up. She instantly dropped her warm smile, her posture stiffening as she returned to her strict, professional demeanor. She turned her attention back to the massive oak desk and the large parchment tactical map spread across it. "Let us return to the logistics of your eastern borders, seeing as your technique practice was interrupted." "My borders are impenetrable," Daniel insisted, moving to the opposite side of the desk. He leaned heavily over the map, pointing to a series of crimson markers near a drawn river. "I have stationed 3 elite guard rotations here, near the river bend." 3 rotations that switch precisely at midnight, every single night, Isabelle countered, leaning over the map as well to scrutinize the markings. "It is painfully predictable. A rogue faction could time your shifts using a basic pocket watch and traverse the water undetected." "They are disciplined, not predictable," Daniel argued, gesturing broadly to emphasize his strategic brilliance. "You are completely ignoring the elevation advantage of the adjacent ridge." As he emphasized his point, his sweeping hand collided violently with the thick ceramic mug sitting near the map's edge. Isabelle lunged forward to catch it, her reflexes sharp, but she was a fraction of a second too late. The heavy mug tipped over, sending a dark, steaming wave of hot coffee flooding directly toward the intricate parchment map. "My meticulous audit notes are going to be ruined," Isabelle thought, feeling a sudden jolt of genuine panic. If that liquid destroys the topography lines, this entire diplomatic trip is wasted. "Grab the napkins!" Daniel barked, instantly reaching into the slightly open top drawer to yank out the pristine stack of heavy paper squares. They scrambled simultaneously. Isabelle snatched half the napkins from his grip, throwing them down onto the spreading brown puddle. Daniel swiftly pulled the monogrammed cotton handkerchief from his breast pocket, pressing it hard against the map's vulnerable edge to stop the coffee from soaking the delicate paper. For a frantic, breathless 10 seconds, their argument ceased entirely as they worked in perfect, silent coordination to contain the disaster. Slowly, the chaotic moment settled. The map was successfully preserved, suffering only a minor, faded stain in the uninhabited southern mountains. Isabelle kept her hands pressed flat against the damp napkins, breathing heavily. She looked up, suddenly realizing Daniel's hands were resting mere inches from hers. He was staring directly at her, his dark eyes stripped entirely of their usual arrogance. The quiet, profound proximity felt completely different from their combative clash just moments before. "We saved the border," Daniel noted quietly, a small, remarkably genuine smile touching the corner of his mouth. "Barely," Isabelle whispered back, her voice lacking its usual sharp, pragmatic edge. "He looks dangerously handsome when he is not barking orders," Isabelle realized, feeling a strange, hollow flutter in her chest. For a fleeting, risky moment, she allowed herself to see the vulnerable man beneath the heavy royal title. It felt dangerous, soft, and entirely undeniable. Chapter 4. The vulnerable silence lingered, thick and undeniable, as they stood shoulder to shoulder over the coffee-stained parchment. Isabelle quickly recognized the immense danger of the moment. Letting her emotional guard down in a locked room with the Alpha King was strictly outside her mission parameters. She abruptly stepped back, breaking the invisible tether between them, and tossed the soggy napkins into a nearby brass wastebasket. "I cannot let him see me falter," Isabelle reminded herself firmly, her heart hammering a rapid beat. "My home pack is depending on this military support. I must maintain strict tactical focus." Daniel watched her retreat, his dark brow furrowing. The brief, beautiful window of softness had slammed shut, replaced instantly by the rigid, pragmatic delta he had first encountered. He missed the unguarded warmth already, though his pride refused to let him admit it out loud. "You rely too heavily on outdated parchment, Daniel," Isabelle stated, her tone shifting back to crisp, undeniable professionalism. "Your guard rotations are failing, and I can prove it without spilling any more beverages." Isabelle reached down to her left thigh pocket. She unsnapped the heavy-duty Velcro closure and pulled out a sleek, heavily encrypted satellite tablet. She carried the device everywhere, trusting the advanced technology far more than traditional scout reports. She tapped her thumb against the biometric scanner, the screen glowing brightly in the dim, warm office. "What is that device?" Daniel asked, leaning forward, genuinely intrigued by the unfamiliar piece of hardware. "Real-time surveillance data," Isabelle answered, swiping past multiple security firewalls with practiced ease. She placed the tablet gently on the dry side of the oak desk. "I didn't just review your physical ledgers today. I ran a secondary sweep using my own pack's proprietary tracking software." She tapped a secure file, bringing up a glowing digital map of his eastern borders. Several blinking yellow dots moved slowly across the screen, tracing a deliberate path directly through the exact 2-mile gap she had mentioned earlier. Daniel's posture stiffened immediately. He leaned over the glowing screen, his eyes intensely tracking the moving digital markers. "Those are rogue signatures," Daniel said quietly, a sharp drop in his stomach replacing his previous calm. The threat was tangible, and it was actively unfolding. "They are slipping through exactly where you predicted." "They have been traversing that route for 3 weeks," Isabelle confirmed, her sweet jasmine scent spiking slightly with fresh adrenaline. "They are testing your response times. If you do not adjust those patrol overlaps by tomorrow evening, they will realize the gap is a permanent flaw. Then, they will orchestrate a full strike." Daniel slowly stood upright, pulling his gaze away from the screen and locking his eyes solely onto Isabelle. The competitive frustration he had harbored all evening vanished without a trace. He finally understood the reality of the situation. She wasn't just a stubborn auditor attempting to bruise his ego. She was a brilliant, meticulous tactician, actively saving his territory from a blind spot. She identified a critical flaw my seasoned war counsel completely missed, Daniel thought. A profound sense of deep respect replacing his damaged pride. She is truly magnificent. "You brought the data," Daniel murmured, stepping closer to her, his voice devoid of its previous mocking edge. "You came perfectly prepared to prove me wrong." Isabelle held her chin high, her hands resting calmly by her sides. "I always come prepared, Your Majesty. Now, are we going to fix your vulnerable borders, or are we going to continue arguing about my 6 out of 10 rating?" Chapter 5. The cool blue luminescence of the satellite tablet bathed the office in a clinical light, casting sharp shadows across the coffee-stained parchment map. Daniel stared at the blinking yellow dots representing the rogue wolves, his jaw clenched with a rhythmic tension. The undeniable proof of his failing border patrols was staring him right in the face, mocking his previous certainty. "I am surrounded by a decorated war council, yet it took an auditor from an allied territory to expose this glaring vulnerability," Daniel thought, a potent mixture of profound respect and lingering embarrassment settling in his chest. She is brilliant. Maddeningly, terrifically brilliant. And she knows it. He finally looked away from the encrypted screen, lifting his dark eyes to meet Isabelle's calm gaze. The intense scent of warm mahogany and clove radiated from him, filling the narrow space between them. "You have verified your claim," Daniel conceded, his deep voice stripped of its previous mocking edge. He leaned back slightly, sliding his hands into the pockets of his deep plum trousers. "The Eastern patrols will be restructured immediately. I will dispatch elite enforcement teams to fortify that specific 2-mile gap before dawn. We will not be caught unprepared again." Isabelle offered a singular, crisp nod, her expression remaining as unreadable as a tactical report. She reached forward, tapping the biometric scanner on her tablet to plunge the screen into darkness. "A wise tactical adjustment, Your Majesty. Your pack will be secure, provided your guards follow the new protocols without deviation." She smoothed the front of her navy Henley, her fingers lingering on the soft cotton as she prepared to slide the device back into her left thigh pocket. She assumed the audit was successfully concluded and the locked door standoff was over. She was wrong. "However," Daniel continued, his tone suddenly shifting back to a dangerous, velvety purr. He pulled his hands from his pockets and took a slow, deliberate step toward her. "Fixing a border patrol does not resolve our primary conflict. It merely resolves a logistical oversight. He cannot possibly be returning to the subject of that kiss while his borders are under threat," Isabelle thought, a sudden, frantic thrumming erupting behind her ribs. The man's ego is a towering, indestructible fortress. It's almost impressive. "Our primary conflict?" she asked, raising an eyebrow in a silent challenge. "You rated my technique a 6, Daniel reminded her, his competitive nature fully reigniting. The Alpha King thrived on insurmountable challenges, and the pragmatic delta standing before him was the most fascinating puzzle he had encountered in years. I locked that heavy brass sliding door for a specific reason. We are not leaving this office until I receive a 10. I do not settle for mediocrity." Isabelle let out a soft, incredulous breath that bordered on a laugh. She glanced down at Max. The massive, terrifying direwolf was currently snoring loudly on the expensive rug, his silver-tipped fur rising and falling with every deep breath. He was completely oblivious to the escalating tension. "You want to wager your royal pride on a physical evaluation?" she challenged, crossing her arms over her chest. That is a highly precarious gamble, Daniel. I am not known for grading on a curve. I am proposing a formal wager, Daniel countered smoothly, closing the distance until his scuffed leather shoes nearly touched the toes of her combat boots. If I can shatter your legendary composure and extract a perfect 10 before sunrise, you must publicly accept a position as my lead tactical advisor. I want your mind focused on my interests. He wants to keep me here permanently, Isabelle realized, her pulse executing a rapid, unsteady cadence. He is using a ridiculous bet to secure my expertise. Or perhaps he simply wants me to stay. And if you fail? Isabelle asked, keeping her voice impeccably steady. If the sun rises and my composure remains entirely intact? Daniel smiled, a devastatingly handsome expression that reached his dark eyes. Then I will grant your home pack-full, unrestricted military support. No political caveats, no prolonged treaties, just the brute force you require to save your borders. I'll send my best warriors. Isabelle froze. It was exactly what she needed. It was the sole reason she had driven her slate blue Jeep across the continent, enduring weeks of travel and bureaucratic red tape. I can withstand his charm for a few hours to save my people, she decided firmly, ignoring the treacherous heat pooling in her stomach. I evaluate combat scenarios for a living. I can handle an arrogant, overconfident monarch. I accept your terms, Isabelle stated clearly, looking up into his calculating gaze. The wager is locked. Do not expect any mercy. Chapter 6. The parameters of the wager hung heavily in the air, instantly altering the dynamic of the lavish room. The modern gas fireplace continued to emit a steady, silent heat from the far wall, warming the space without a single flickering ember. Yet, the temperature between Isabelle and Daniel felt drastically higher, thick with palpable, unspoken anticipation. Daniel did not hesitate to initiate his strategy. He reached up, his fingers brushing the silver signet ring on his right hand as he slowly, deliberately adjusted the cuffs of his rolled-up sleeves. The subtle movement flexed the heavy muscles in his forearms, drawing Isabelle's keen gaze before she could forcefully look away. She analyzes everything, even the way I move, Daniel observed silently, catching the minute flicker of her eyes. If I'm going to dismantle her defenses, I must overwhelm her meticulous logic with pure sensory input. I need to be undeniable. You operate on a strict analytical scale, Daniel murmured, stepping further into her personal space. The rich, spicy fragrance of clove and mahogany enveloped her, deliberately masking her own scent of sweet jasmine and crushed blackberries. You observe, you categorize, and you dismiss. But true passion defies metrics, Isabelle. It cannot be charted on a clipboard. Everything can be quantified if you have the right data points, Isabelle replied, though her voice lacked its usual crisp authority. She instinctively took a half-step backward, only to feel the solid, unforgiving edge of the massive oak desk press against her lower back. She was cornered between the wood and the king. This is a tactical error of the highest order, Isabelle thought, her heart performing a frantic, irregular rhythm against her throat. I surrendered my spatial advantage. I must regain the perimeter before I lose my focus entirely. She reached down, her fingers brushing the wooden clipboard resting on the desk, searching for a physical anchor to ground her racing mind. Before she could grasp it, Daniel closed the remaining gap. He did not touch her body yet. Instead, he placed a large hand flat on the desk on either side of her hips, caging her in completely with his reach. The proximity was intoxicating. Isabelle stared up at him, her breath hitching slightly. The cool, arrogant monarch had vanished, replaced by an intensely focused predator who knew exactly what he wanted. "Rate my current stance," Daniel challenged softly, leaning his face down until his lips hovered mere inches from her ear. His warm breath sent an aggressive, electric shiver cascading down her spine. "Am I leaning with too much dominant shoulder now, Delta? Or is this posture more to your liking?" 7, Isabelle managed to whisper, though her voice betrayed a distinct tremble. "Your physical intimidation tactics are adequate, but intimidation is not the same as skill." "Adequate," Daniel scoffed internally, his competitive drive surging to a fever pitch. "I will make her forget the numbers, the audit, and the entire world outside this room." He shifted closer, the fabric of his deep plum vest brushing against her navy Henley. He tilted his head, his nose trailing lightly along the sensitive curve of her jawline. The deliberate, agonizingly slow movement was devastating to her resolve. Isabelle squeezed her eyes shut, fighting a desperate, sudden urge to fist her hands in his dark hair and pull him closer to end the torment. A quiet, profound realization began to bloom in the confined space. The chemistry sparking between them was not merely a clash of stubborn egos or a playful wager. It felt ancient, heavy, and undeniably correct. It was the subtle, undeniable beginning of a true bond, a recognition that went deeper than words. Daniel turned his face, his lips grazing the corner of her mouth with agonizing lightness. He waited for her to yield, to offer the perfect 10 he demanded. Isabelle let out a soft, ragged sigh, her formidable control finally fracturing. Before their lips could fully connect, a thunderous series of heavy blows slammed against the heavy oak doors. "Your Majesty!" A frantic, breathless voice shouted from the corridor, the urgent sound penetrating the thick wood and shattering the moment. "King Daniel! We have a critical emergency at the border!" The heavy, romantic spell shattered instantly. Daniel ripped his gaze away from her mouth, staring at the brass sliding lock with blatant, murderous intent. Max, startled by the sudden noise, scrambled off the rug with a loud, confused bark, his tail hitting the desk. Isabelle sagged against the oak, taking a deep, shuddering breath to steady her chaotic heart. Chapter 7. The frantic pounding on the thick oak doors echoed through the office, completely obliterating the intoxicating tension that had ensnared them. The romantic wager was instantly suspended by the cold reality of duty. Daniel's posture transformed in a fraction of a second. The playful, seductive challenger vanished, and the ruthless alpha king snapped into existence.
Another perfectly timed crisis to steal my focus,
Daniel thought, a surge of dark frustration battling with his innate protective instincts.
My kingdom never sleeps, and it seemingly despises my personal life. I suppose that is the price of a crown.
He pushed away from the oak desk, his tailored suit shifting flawlessly over his broad shoulders, and strode toward the entrance. He reached out, gripping the manual sliding brass lock, and shoved it back with a harsh metallic clatter. He yanked the heavy door open, revealing a breathless, wide-eyed royal guard standing in the corridor.
"Report, Lieutenant,"
Daniel ordered, his deep voice carrying an undeniable, chilling authority. The warm mahogany scent he projected suddenly shifted, taking on a sharper, commanding edge that demanded immediate results. The young guard stood at rigid attention, though his chest heaved with the exertion of his sprint. "We received an emergency distress signal from the western perimeter, sire. A large, highly coordinated faction of rogue wolves just ambushed the logging outpost near the ridge. They are heavily armed and moving fast. Isabelle instantly stepped away from the desk, her pragmatic, hyper-competent nature seizing control of her fractured emotions. The near-miss kiss was locked securely in a mental vault. She was back on duty, her mind already calculating tactical responses. A coordinated strike on the western ridge during an audit, Isabelle analyzed rapidly, tapping her silver tactical pen against her thigh. That is miles away from the eastern gap we just discussed. This timing is too convenient. It smells like a diversion. She swiftly pulled her encrypted satellite tablet from her pocket, activating the screen with a quick thumb press. "Lieutenant," Isabelle called out, stepping into the guard's line of sight, "what is the precise casualty count, and have the perimeter alarms at the eastern river bend been triggered? I need the status of the secondary zones." The guard blinked, clearly confused by the unfamiliar Delta woman in tactical gear barking questions in the king's private office. He looked to Daniel for permission to speak to a civilian. "Answer her," Daniel commanded firmly, trusting her instincts implicitly. "No casualties reported yet, ma'am, but they have our scouts pinned down," the guard answered quickly. "And no, the eastern river bend is completely silent. All sensors there are green." "It is a feint," Isabelle stated, looking directly at Daniel with a sharp, knowing gaze. "They want you to deploy your elite enforcement teams to the western ridge to save the logging outpost. The moment you leave the eastern gap undefended, their main force will breach the river. They are playing for the heart of the territory." Daniel's dark eyes narrowed as he rapidly processed her brilliant deduction. She was right. The rogues were utilizing advanced military strategies, attempting to stretch his forces too thin. "I finally possess a partner who anticipates the enemy's moves before I even see the board," Daniel thought, a fierce wave of pride swelling in his chest. "She is indispensable, and I haven't even won the wager yet." "Lieutenant, mobilize the secondary guard units to reinforce the logging outpost, but do not touch the eastern patrols," Daniel commanded, his voice echoing in the stone corridor. "Keep the main enforcement teams locked on the river bend. I am heading to the western ridge personally to handle the diversion and end this." "Yes, sire," the guard shouted, turning on his heel to sprint back toward the barracks. Daniel turned back into the office. Max let out a low, nervous whine, sensing the imminent danger. Daniel reached for his deep plum suit jacket, pulling it swiftly over his broad shoulders. He checked his pockets, ensuring the silver signet ring and his heavy brass key were secure. "Stay here, Isabelle," Daniel instructed, his tone brooking no argument. "The palace is secure. I will neutralize this threat and return before the sun rises." "Do not be ridiculous," Isabelle replied coolly, leaving her wooden clipboard on the desk and marching toward the door with her hand resting on her tablet pocket. "I am a tactical auditor. You are walking into a combat zone with potentially flawed intel. I am coming with you, Daniel. Points for bravery, 0 for logic." Chapter 8. The urgency of the situation propelled them quickly down the grand, echoing corridors of the royal palace. The playful banter regarding technique and numbers had completely evaporated, replaced by a grim, shared focus on survival. Isabelle matched Daniel's long, hurried strides perfectly, her scuff-resistant combat boots moving silently over the marble floors. "You will ride in my vehicle," Daniel stated firmly as they approached the heavy glass doors leading to the private royal courtyard. "It is heavily armored and equipped with a direct communication line to the vanguard. I cannot have you exposed in an open jeep." "My utility jeep is reinforced and possesses a heavy-duty front winch," Isabelle countered, adjusting her grip on her encrypted tablet. It is vastly superior for traversing rugged forest terrain. Your luxury sedan will get stuck in the mud or high center on a rock before we even reach the tree line. She is relentlessly practical, even when we are facing an ambush, Daniel noted silently, pushing the heavy glass doors open and stepping out into the cool night air. But I am not allowing her to drive an unarmored vehicle into an active skirmish. My pride won't allow it. My sedan possesses a reinforced chassis and bulletproof glass, Daniel replied, gesturing toward the sleek, midnight sapphire vehicle parked under the glow of the courtyard lamps. Furthermore, the engine is drastically faster on the main roads. We are taking the sedan, Isabelle. That is not a request, Delta. It is a royal decree. Isabelle frowned, smoothing the front of her jacket to disguise a spike of irritation. She disliked relinquishing control of her transportation, but she could not logically argue against the superior speed of his engine during a time-sensitive crisis. Fine, she conceded crisply, her jasmine scent sharpening. But if you scratch the paint on a tree stump or ruin the alignment, I will deduct significant points from your driving score. This is a performance review. Daniel huffed a short, humorless laugh, grabbing the sleek metal door handle. Before he could pull it open, a massive, silver-tipped blur darted past his legs. Max, the direwolf, leaped gracefully into the back seat of the luxury sedan, his massive body instantly occupying the entire row. The giant beast let out a pathetic whine, refusing to be left behind in the empty palace. Of course. The fearsome beast demands a chauffeur and leather seats, Daniel groaned internally, resisting the urge to drag the massive canine out. This is hardly the intimidating, powerful arrival I intended to project to the troops. He provides excellent thermal regulation for the interior, Isabelle commented dryly, sliding into the front passenger seat and immediately booting up her tracking software. Daniel shook his head, climbing behind the leather-wrapped steering wheel. He ignited the engine, the powerful machine roaring to life with a deep, menacing purr that vibrated through the floorboards. He threw the vehicle into gear, tires briefly gripping the cobblestones before launching them out of the royal gates and onto the winding road leading toward the western ridge. The interior of the midnight sapphire sedan was quiet, save for the rhythmic hum of the tires and Max's heavy panting in the back. The ambient streetlights cast fleeting shadows across Daniel's sharp, determined profile. He drove with intense, focused precision, his large hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as they accelerated. Isabelle kept her eyes glued to the glowing screen of her tablet, tracking the erratic movements of the rogue signatures near the logging outpost. Despite the imminent danger, the confined space of the vehicle forced her to acknowledge the potent, masculine scent of clove and mahogany filling the cabin. We are driving directly into a violent ambush, Isabelle reminded herself, forcing her heart rate to stay steady. I must suppress this ridiculous attraction. Lives depend on my clarity, and I am a professional. They have fortified a position near the old mill, Isabelle reported, her voice slicing through the heavy silence. We will be in range in less than 4 minutes. Brace yourself, Daniel. Daniel did not look away from the dark road. Prepare yourself, Isabelle. The wager is paused, but not forgotten. Tonight, we survive. Tomorrow, we finish the audit. Chapter 9. The midnight sapphire luxury sedan tore down the desolate, winding forest road. The premium vehicle absorbed the brutal, uneven terrain with surprising grace, a testament to its extravagant engineering. Inside the heavily armored cabin, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. The only illumination came from the dashboard dials and the cool glow of the encrypted satellite tablet resting on Isabelle's lap. This man drives like a reckless teenager fleeing a crime scene, Isabelle thought, bracing her scuff-resistant combat boots against the floorboard as they took a sharp turn. Yet his physical control of the machine is undeniably precise. It is highly infuriating. She tapped her silver tactical pen against the tablet screen, tracking the cluster of yellow dots. They were rapidly converging on the logging outpost. Beside her, Daniel gripped the leather-wrapped steering wheel, his deep plum suit jacket stretched tightly across his broad shoulders, his jaw locked in grim determination. "We are 3 miles out," Isabelle announced, her voice slicing through the heavy silence. "The primary rogue faction has breached the outer perimeter of the camp. Your secondary guard units are currently engaging them near the tree line." "Understood," Daniel replied, his tone sharp and commanding. He pressed the accelerator closer to the floor. The powerful engine roared in response. "I am bringing a civilian into a volatile combat zone," Daniel thought, his protective instincts warring with his logical mind. She is a highly trained Delta, but the urge to lock her safely in a vault is becoming a severe distraction. Suddenly, a massive, furry head shoved its way between the front seats. Max the direwolf, completely disregarding the ample space in the back row, planted his front paws firmly on the center console. He let out a pathetic, high-pitched whine, his silver-tipped fur brushing against Daniel's shoulder and Isabelle's arm. "Get in the back, Max," Daniel ordered harshly. "You are obstructing my peripheral vision and ruining my focus." Max ignored the Alpha King altogether. Instead, the giant beast turned his massive head toward Isabelle, offering her a sloppy lick on the cheek before resting his heavy chin on her shoulder. "Even his terrifying guard animal prefers my company," Isabelle mused, fighting the urge to smooth the front of her jacket to hide a smirk. Daniel's authority is practically non-existent outside of his official title. "He is seeking comfort," Isabelle defended lightly, scratching the direwolf behind the ears. "He clearly senses the impending conflict. You should try positive reinforcement instead of barking commands at him." "He is a direwolf, not a delicate lapdog," Daniel countered, shooting a dark glare at the animal. "He is supposed to be a ruthless deterrent, yet he behaves like a frightened toddler." "She undermines my commands with effortless grace," Daniel thought, feeling a sudden surge of fond amusement beneath his anxiety. "It is a catastrophic blow to my pride, and I am enjoying every second of it." Isabelle directed her attention back to the glowing screen. "The rogue signatures are shifting. They are funneling your guards toward the old mill. It is a classic bottleneck maneuver." "Then we will break the bottleneck," Daniel stated firmly, his dark eyes fixed on the road ahead. "We will approach from the eastern ridge. It will grant us a tactical elevation advantage." The sedan burst through the final stretch of dense trees, the logging outpost finally coming into view. The scene was pure, unadulterated chaos. Shouts echoed through the night air, clashing with the guttural snarls of shifting wolves. Daniel slammed on the brakes, the heavy vehicle skidding to a halt just outside the immediate fray. He threw the car into park and reached for the door handle. "Stay close to me, Isabelle. This is not a drill." "I never assumed it was," she replied evenly, slipping the tablet into her left thigh pocket and gripping her silver pen tight. Chapter 10. The night air was freezing as Daniel kicked his door open, stepping out of the Midnight Sapphire luxury sedan. He instantly projected a suffocating aura of dominance, his warm mahogany and clove scent spiking with pure aggression. Isabelle slipped out of the passenger side, her combat boots hitting the dirt with a quiet thud. Max scrambled out behind her, whining nervously and pressing his massive bulk against her legs for protection. He truly is a massive coward, Isabelle thought, patting the direwolf's side. But I suppose a 300-pound shield is an acceptable tactical asset. Ahead of them, the logging outpost was in total disarray. Torches burned erratically, illuminating the violent clashes between the royal guards and the invading rogue faction. Daniel did not hesitate. He strode forward, his deep plum suit looking absurdly out of place amidst the mud and blood. Yet his authority was indisputable. "Hold the line at the barracks!" Daniel roared, his voice echoing over the chaotic din. Several royal guards immediately rallied at the sound of their alpha, reinforcing a collapsing defensive perimeter. "Their flank is exposed on the left," Isabelle observed, moving swiftly to keep pace with him. She kept her posture low, her eyes continuously scanning the dark tree line for secondary threats. "Your men are overcommitting to the center." "Lieutenant!" Daniel shouted, pointing toward the vulnerabilities she had just identified. "Shift 3 units to the left flank immediately. Do not let them circle behind the mill." She reads a battlefield faster than my most seasoned commanders, Daniel thought, pride swelling rapidly in his chest. I need to ensure she survives this night so I can properly hire her. As Daniel directed the troop movements, a sudden rustle in the dense brush to his right went altogether unnoticed by the distracted king. A massive, scarred rogue wolf lunged from the shadows, aiming directly for Daniel's exposed throat. The attack was silent and incredibly fast, a lethal ambush launched from a blind spot. He is too focused on the macro strategy, Isabelle realized, a sharp jolt of adrenaline spiking through her veins. He left his personal perimeter completely unguarded. Daniel turned at the last possible second, his eyes widening as the rogue closed the distance. He had no time to shift, no time to draw a weapon. He braced for a devastating impact. It never came. Isabelle moved with blistering speed. She stepped fluidly between Daniel and the attacking beast, her arms snapping forward in a precise, practiced arc. She drove her silver-engraved tactical pen directly into a vulnerable nerve cluster near the rogue wolf's shoulder. The beast let out a startled, agonizing yelp, its momentum instantly shattered by the painful strike. The rogue crumpled to the dirt, effectively paralyzed by the silver embedded deep in its muscle tissue. Isabelle calmly withdrew the pen, wiping the tip on her charcoal gray cargo pants. She did not break a sweat. She simply smoothed the front of her navy Henley and looked up at the stunned Alpha King. "You should monitor your blind spots, Your Majesty," Isabelle stated with a flat tone, refusing to let her lingering fear show. That was a glaring tactical error. She just neutralized a 200-pound killing machine with office supplies, Daniel thought, staring at her in profound awe. I am thoroughly, irrevocably captivated by this woman. Daniel swallowed hard, recovering his composure. He reached down, hauling the incapacitated rogue away from their position. "Your intervention is noted, Delta. We need to secure the perimeter before more of them breach the line." "Agreed," Isabelle nodded, her sweet jasmine scent cutting through the heavy air. "Lead the way, Daniel, but keep your eyes open." Chapter 11. The skirmish at the logging outpost ended as swiftly as it began. With the Alpha King physically present and Isabelle's sharp tactical directions fortifying the guard lines, the rogue faction realized they were outmatched. They retreated back into the dense forest, leaving the royal forces battered but victorious. Daniel and Isabelle did not linger in the muddy aftermath. Following standard security protocols, they retreated to a nearby designated safe house, a small, fortified cabin situated a mile away from the main outpost. They needed a secure location to debrief and allow the royal guards to conduct a thorough sweep of the territory. Daniel unlocked the heavy wooden door, ushering Isabelle and a very anxious Max inside. The cabin was stark and utilitarian, lacking the lavish furnishings of the royal palace. A small sofa sat in the center of the room, facing a modern gas heater mounted on the far wall. "We will remain here until the Vanguard confirms the region is clear," Daniel announced, shedding his ruined plum suit jacket and tossing it over a wooden chair. His white dress shirt was stained with dirt, his sleeves still aggressively rolled up to his elbows. Isabelle nodded, her adrenaline finally beginning to crash. A sudden cascade of ice water over her ribs signaled the delayed physical reaction to the violent ambush. She shivered violently, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. The temperature inside the secluded cabin was brutally cold. "I cannot show weakness," Isabelle thought, forcing her teeth to stop chattering. "I am a professional auditor. I do not freeze under pressure." Daniel immediately noticed her discomfort. He strode over to the wall and turned the heavy mechanical dial for the modern gas heater. A faint click echoed in the quiet room, but the appliance remained completely lifeless. No heat radiated from the vents. "The igniter is broken," Daniel sighed, a heavy dose of frustration lacing his words. "Of course it is. The royal maintenance budget is clearly being mismanaged." "I survived a deadly ambush, only to be defeated by faulty plumbing," Daniel thought, dragging a hand through his dark hair. "This night is an unmitigated disaster for my pride." "It is acceptable," Isabelle lied, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to maintain a neutral demeanor. "We just need to endure it for a few hours." Max, possessing an excellent sense of self-preservation, immediately collapsed onto the braided rug directly in front of the broken heater. He curled into a massive furry ball, taking up the vast majority of the floor space and going to sleep, leaving only the small sofa available for the two exhausted shifters. Daniel began rummaging through a small storage trunk near the door. He pulled out a single, thick wool blanket. He turned back to Isabelle, holding the fabric up. "There is only one," Daniel stated, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The competitive tension of their earlier wager suddenly came rushing back, replacing the adrenaline of the fight. "And you are currently freezing, Delta. We need to share body heat to prevent hypothermia." "He is using basic survival tactics to force proximity," Isabelle analyzed, her heart executing a sudden, rapid rhythm against her sternum. "It is highly manipulative and undeniably effective." "I am perfectly capable of regulating my own temperature," Isabelle argued stubbornly, though another violent shiver betrayed her words. "Isabelle," Daniel said softly, stepping closer. His warm mahogany scent was incredibly inviting in the frigid air. "For once tonight, stop analyzing the situation and just accept the logic. Sit down." Reluctantly, she moved toward the small sofa. With Max monopolizing the floor, they had no choice but to share the cramped cushions, sitting pressed tightly together. Daniel draped the heavy wool blanket over their shoulders, his large arm wrapping securely around her waist to pull her flush against his side. The sudden, intense warmth of his body was overwhelming. Chapter 12. The heavy wool blanket provided immediate, vital insulation against the freezing cabin air. Pressed shoulder to shoulder on the cramped sofa, Isabelle and Daniel sat in a tense, pregnant silence. Max snored peacefully against Isabelle's thigh, wholly oblivious to the chaotic energy swirling between the two wolves. The adrenaline from the violent skirmish was rapidly evaporating, leaving a raw, vulnerable exhaustion in its wake. Isabelle stared straight ahead at the broken gas heater, acutely aware of the hard muscle of Daniel's thigh pressing intimately against her own. She could feel the steady, reassuring thrum of his heartbeat through his dirt-stained dress shirt. I am supposed to be a detached, impartial auditor, Isabelle thought, desperately trying to maintain her professional facade. Yet, sitting here, wrapped in his arms, feels dangerously correct. My logic is failing. Daniel slowly turned his head, his gaze tracing the sharp, beautiful profile of her face. The faint scent of sweet jasmine and crushed blackberries was acting like a powerful sedative, calming the lingering aggression from the battlefield. He remembered the blinding speed she had displayed when she saved his life with a mere tactical pin. She did not hesitate to protect me, Daniel mused, a profound sense of awe settling deep in his chest. She doesn't want my crown or my wealth. She just wants my respect. And she has earned every ounce of it. You saved my life tonight, Daniel murmured quietly, the deep timbre of his voice vibrating against her side. I was careless. I owe you a significant debt, Isabelle. You owe me a functioning border patrol, Isabelle corrected gently, finally turning her head to meet his dark eyes. I simply protected my investment. A deceased monarch cannot sign a military treaty for my pack. Daniel chuckled, a low, genuine sound that sent a pleasant shiver down her spine. Always the pragmatist, even when wrapped in a single blanket in a freezing cabin. The playful banter faded, replaced by a heavy, magnetic pull. Daniel shifted closer, his hand sliding up from her waist to gently cup the side of her face. His thumb brushed lightly over her cheekbone, wiping away a small smudge of dirt. Isabelle did not pull away. The strict boundaries she had meticulously constructed were crumbling rapidly. The wager is still active, Daniel whispered, his gaze dropping deliberately to her lips. And the sun has not yet risen. I am going to lose this bet, Isabelle realized, her pulse skyrocketing as she looked at his handsome, bruised face. And for the first time in my life, I am perfectly content with admitting defeat. This time, there was no arrogance in his approach. There was no forceful attempt to dominate or conquer her defenses. Daniel leaned in slowly, offering her every opportunity to pull away. When she remained perfectly still, her breath hitching in anticipation, he finally closed the distance. The kiss was a revelation. It was soft, searching, and incredibly tender. The lingering adrenaline from the fight melted into a deep, undeniable passion. Isabelle let out a quiet sigh, her hands instinctively coming up to grip the lapels of his ruined shirt. She pulled him closer, kissing him back with a fierce, matching intensity that surprised them both. It was a perfect, seamless connection. The quiet lock of a true mate bond snapping firmly into place. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. He did not ask for a score. He did not push his royal pride. He simply held her close. Isabelle smoothed the front of her navy Henley with trembling fingers, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips. 10, she whispered softly into the quiet room. That was a definitive 10. Chapter 13. Dawn broke over the rugged western ridge, casting a pallid gray light through the narrow windows of the fortified safe house. The interior of the stark cabin remained brutally cold. The modern gas heater mounted on the far wall sat lifeless, its broken igniter a silent testament to palace maintenance failures. Beneath a single thick wool blanket, Isabelle Fletcher lay perfectly still, her scuff-resistant combat boots resting near the edge of the small sofa. She was acutely aware of the heavy, muscular arm draped securely over her waist. King Daniel slept deeply beside her, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm beneath his ruined, dirt-stained white dress shirt. The intoxicating fragrance of warm mahogany and clove radiated from his skin, wrapping around her senses and momentarily blurring her usually razor-sharp focus. I allowed a fleeting moment of vulnerability to compromise my primary objective, Isabelle reprimanded herself, carefully cataloging the lingering warmth of their midnight kiss. My pack is currently starving, and I am prioritizing romantic entanglements. It is a severe tactical failure. Moving with practiced clandestine stealth, Isabelle gently lifted Daniel's heavy arm. She slid out from underneath the wool blanket, suppressing a violent shiver as the frigid morning air instantly permeated her charcoal gray cargo pants and fitted navy Henley. On the opposite side of the sofa, Max, the direwolf, snored obnoxiously, his massive silver-tipped body curled into a dense sphere of fur. Isabelle retreated to the far corner of the cabin, distancing herself from the sleeping alpha. She reached into her left thigh pocket and extracted her heavily encrypted satellite tablet. Her thumb pressed the biometric scanner, and the screen illuminated her sharp features with a harsh blue glow. She needed to recalibrate her mission. The Royal Eastern Patrols were going to be restructured today, which meant the temporary vulnerability her home pack relied on for safe scavenging would vanish. She rapidly opened a secure communication channel, her fingers flying across the digital keyboard to compile the newly acquired patrol overlaps and shift schedules. I must transmit these logistics immediately, Isabelle calculated, her jaw tightening with grim resolve. If my people do not receive this updated route, they will stumble blindly into Daniel's elite enforcement teams by tomorrow evening. Across the room, Daniel stirred. The sudden absence of her sweet jasmine and crushed blackberry scent roused his heightened alpha instincts. He opened his dark eyes, his gaze instantly sweeping the cramped room. He spotted her standing in the shadowy corner, the blue light of the tablet reflecting off her focused expression. She fits against my side as though she was intricately engineered for it, Daniel thought, a profound sense of possessive satisfaction washing over him. Yet, she is already awake, plotting her next maneuver instead of resting. He pushed himself into a seated position, rolling his broad shoulders to alleviate the stiffness from sleeping on a substandard mattress. You are up exceptionally early for someone who survived a rogue ambush just hours ago, Daniel observed, his deep voice thick with sleep. Isabelle flinched, her thumb hovering over the transmit icon. She quickly tapped the screen, sending the encrypted data packet into the ether before smoothly lowering the device to her side. I was evaluating our perimeter security. The sun is up. The vanguard should be arriving momentarily to escort us back to the palace. Daniel narrowed his eyes, immediately detecting the subtle shift in her posture. He stood up, crossing the freezing room with slow, deliberate strides. He did not miss the defensive way she gripped her silver tactical pen alongside the tablet. You were not checking the perimeter, Daniel stated, stopping mere inches from her. His competitive, highly protective nature flared to life. You were transmitting data. What exactly did you just send on that encrypted network, Delta? Isabelle held her ground, her chin lifting in an unyielding display of defiance. I submitted a routine status report to my superiors. It is standard protocol. Do not insult my intelligence, Daniel warned softly, his gaze dropping to the dark screen of the tablet. You just forwarded my restructured border logistics, didn't you? Chapter 14. The freezing temperature inside the fortified cabin suddenly felt volatile. Daniel stared down at the resolute Delta Wolf, a sharp jolt of betrayal piercing through his chest. He had bared his throat to her in combat, shared his body heat, and offered her a kiss that fundamentally altered his internal gravity. In return, she was apparently conducting clandestine espionage. I offered her my unequivocal trust, and she responded with calculated subterfuge, Daniel thought, his jaw clenching so hard his teeth ground together. She manipulated the wager and the ambush to steal sovereign military intelligence. You used my attraction to access my tactical ledgers, Daniel accused, his deep voice vibrating with suppressed fury. He gestured aggressively toward the tablet resting against her thigh. You critiqued my patrols to learn the exact weaknesses, and then you transmitted the updated rotations to your territory. That is a treasonous offense, Isabelle. Isabelle smoothed the front of her navy Henley, forcing her rapidly accelerating heartbeat to steady. She despised the profound disappointment swimming in his dark eyes, but she refused to apologize for ensuring her people's survival. He perceives this as a malicious personal attack on his pride, Isabelle analyzed, her posture remaining impeccably rigid. He cannot comprehend the desperate pragmatism required when an entire pack is hovering on the brink of collapse. I did not orchestrate a rogue ambush to steal your secrets, Your Majesty, Isabelle countered, her tone slicing through the tension like a freshly sharpened blade. My presence here was officially sanctioned. I discovered a glaring vulnerability in your defenses, and I provided the solution to fix it. I merely shared that localized schedule with my home pack. To bypass my guards, Daniel barked, stepping closer until his ruined white dress shirt brushed against her tactical gear. Max the direwolf let out a nervous whine from the sofa, the loud voices disturbing his peaceful slumber. You are feeding my security protocols to an allied state without authorization. Because my pack is dying, Isabelle finally shouted, her legendary composure shattering completely. The raw, desperate admission hung heavily in the frigid air, silencing the Alpha King instantly. Daniel froze, the aggressive posture draining from his broad shoulders. He stared at her, genuinely shocked by the profound anguish suddenly visible in her sharp features. Isabelle took a shuddering breath, gripping her silver tactical pen until her knuckles turned white. Our western borders collapsed 3 months ago. A vicious blight wiped out our primary agricultural yields, and our hunting grounds are desolate. We do not possess the numbers to fight the encroaching rogues. She is shouldering the weight of an entire failing territory, Daniel realized, feeling a massive boulder lift off his shoulders as the perceived betrayal evaporated into profound understanding. She is not a spy. She is a desperate protector. We have been utilizing the 3-hour gap in your eastern river patrols to safely scavenge for resources, Isabelle confessed, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. When I realized your war council was restructuring the overlaps, I knew my people would accidentally walk into your elite enforcement teams. I transmitted the new schedule so they could alter their scavenging routes and avoid a slaughter. We are starving, Daniel, but we are too proud to beg for charity. The silence in the broken safe house was deafening. Daniel looked at the formidable woman standing before him. She had faced down a 200-pound rogue wolf without flinching, yet she was currently trembling from the sheer vulnerability of admitting her pack's weakness. Daniel slowly reached out, his large hand gently wrapping around her wrist, sliding the tablet and pen from her tight grip. He set the items carefully on a nearby wooden crate. You should have asked for my aid, Daniel murmured softly, his thumb brushing the pulse point on her wrist. The wager was merely a game. I would have granted your pack military support and provisions the moment you requested them, I am a tactical auditor, Isabelle replied, her sweet jasmine scent tinged with lingering sorrow. I negotiate from a position of strength, not desperation. You are my equal, Daniel corrected firmly, pulling her into his chest. And you will never have to scavenge in the shadows again. Chapter 15. The transition from the freezing, isolated safe house back to the unapologetically opulent royal palace was jarring. Daniel and Isabelle rode in the midnight sapphire sedan, the heavily armored vehicle gliding smoothly over the cobblestone courtyard. Once inside, they barely had a moment to separate before an urgent summons dragged them directly into the Grand Council chamber. The chamber was a sprawling room dominated by a massive, circular mahogany table. Crystal chandeliers cast a brilliant, unforgiving light over the assembled royal advisors. Councilman Harford, a severe man with a perpetually pinched expression, stood at the head of the table, clutching a stack of freshly printed surveillance logs. This is a blatant violation of sovereign jurisdiction, Harford bellowed the moment Daniel pushed open the heavy oak doors. Our perimeter signal towers detected an unauthorized, heavily encrypted frequency burst originating from the western safe house at dawn. We triangulated the transmission and found it contained our newly established border shift rotations. Isabelle stood quietly beside the Alpha King, her charcoal gray cargo pants and fitted navy Henley looking drastically out of place among the lavishly appointed aristocrats in their silk finery. She maintained a stoic, unreadable expression, though her fingers twitched toward the heavy thigh pocket where she had securely stowed her retrieved tablet and tactical pen before leaving the cabin. I am surrounded by pampered politicians who have never faced a rogue ambush or a starving winter, Isabelle thought, evaluating the exits with practiced efficiency. They are about to demand a public execution for a victimless breach of protocol. Daniel strode into the room, his ruined, dirt-stained plum suit projecting a dangerous, chaotic authority that the pristine council members inherently feared. He did not bother to sit down. He slammed both hands onto the polished mahogany table, leaning forward with predatory grace. I am fully aware of the transmission, Harford, Daniel stated, his voice a low, threatening rumble that carried to every corner of the chamber. I authorized it. Harford blinked, his pinched expression faltering. You authorized the release of our secure tactical logistics to a foreign pack? Sire, that is highly irregular. It borders on treasonous negligence. These bureaucrats care more for parchment treaties and hypothetical risks than actual pack welfare, Daniel thought, disgust curling the edge of his mouth. They would gladly watch an allied territory burn if it preserved their administrative superiority. The allied packs are currently suffering an unprecedented resource famine, Daniel lied smoothly, presenting the situation as a calculated alliance rather than a desperate theft. I am proactively providing them with secure corridors to navigate our territory for trading purposes. Isabelle Fletcher is acting as the official liaison for this joint initiative. The council members exchanged skeptical, wary glances. Harford adjusted his spectacles, clearly dissatisfied with the impromptu explanation. Sire, Delta Fletcher accessed those files without formal council oversight. Protocol dictates she be detained and thoroughly interrogated for potential espionage. Isabelle's jaw tightened. She stepped forward, preparing to defend her own actions, but Daniel threw his arm out, physically blocking her path. The scent of warm mahogany and clove spiked heavily with dominance, forcing several of the weaker advisors to avert their eyes. Delta Fletcher is the sole reason our western logging outpost did not fall to a rogue ambush last night, Daniel snarled, his patience fully extinguished. She neutralized a lethal threat and subsequently identified a fatal flaw in your meticulously planned patrol routes. You will not detain her. But the protocol, Harford began to argue, his voice rising in panic. I am the protocol, Daniel interrupted, his dark eyes flashing with unquestionable authority. Isabelle Fletcher is operating under my direct, personal protection. Any move against her is a direct move against the Crown. Furthermore, she will be attending the diplomatic gala this evening as my honored guest. Harford's mouth snapped shut. The room descended into a tense, suffocating silence. He just publicly declared me untouchable, Isabelle realized, a strange mixture of awe and profound gratitude blossoming in her chest. He shielded me from his own government without a second thought. Daniel turned away from the terrified council, offering Isabelle a subtle, reassuring nod. Come, Isabelle, you have a gala to prepare for, and I believe we have a tailor to thoroughly traumatize. Chapter 16. The guest quarters assigned to Isabelle were unapologetically opulent, featuring sweeping velvet drapes and a massive four-poster bed. It was a stark juxtaposition to the stark, utilitarian safe house she had occupied merely hours ago. Currently, the lavish suite was transformed into a chaotic battlefield of fabric, pins, and frantic palace staff. Madame Vivienne, the royal tailor, was aggressively brandishing a voluminous ruby chiffon gown. The garment possessed an extravagant train and a bodice tightly structured with rigid boning. It looked beautiful, terribly uncomfortable, and fundamentally incompatible with rapid movement. It is a masterpiece of sartorial elegance, Vivienne insisted, holding the heavy fabric against Isabelle's athletic frame. You will look like a radiant, delicate flower beside the king. Isabelle stood in the center of the room, wearing her standard-fitted navy Henley and a pair of dark leggings. She stared at the ruby chiffon with undisguised disdain. I will not masquerade as a delicate aristocrat when my primary profession involves tactical auditing and hand-to-hand combat, Isabelle thought, firmly pushing the gown away. If a rogue breaches the ballroom, I cannot execute a defensive maneuver while dragging 10 pounds of decorative silk. I appreciate the craftsmanship, madame, Isabelle stated evenly, her tone leaving zero room for negotiation. But I do not wear gowns. I require garments that allow for a full range of motion. I need a suit, specifically a tailored suit with reinforced stitching. Vivienne gasped, clutching the chiffon to her chest as if Isabelle had suggested wearing burlap. A suit? To the diplomatic gala? It is highly unorthodox. The council will whisper. Let them whisper, Isabelle replied, turning toward a rolling rack of discarded garments. I am attending this event as a formidable ally, not a decorative accessory. Now, fetch your measuring tape. We have 3 hours to construct a miracle. 3 tense hours later, at the bottom of the grand sweeping staircase in the main foyer, Daniel waited patiently. He had discarded his ruined plum suit in favor of a pristine, midnight black tuxedo that emphasized his broad shoulders and commanding height. I fully expect her to march down these stairs in her charcoal cargo pants just to spite the royal dress code, Daniel mused, a fond smile playing on his lips. She is delightfully stubborn, and I would not change a single aspect of her personality. The heavy mahogany doors at the top of the landing slowly swung open. Daniel looked up, his breath catching painfully in his throat. Isabelle did not wear a gown. She descended the marble staircase wearing a breathtaking, custom-tailored charcoal suit. The jacket was exquisitely fitted, accentuating the sharp, athletic lines of her silhouette, while the trousers draped perfectly over a pair of sleek, black leather boots. Beneath the jacket, She wore a crisp, collarless silk shirt that matched the deep sapphire of the night sky. She looked impeccably sharp, dangerously capable, and incredibly beautiful. Daniel stood completely frozen. The witty, arrogant remarks he usually kept holstered completely evaporated from his mind. I anticipated a reluctant woman forced into uncomfortable silk, Daniel thought, his dark eyes tracking her confident descent. This presentation is infinitely more dangerous to my sanity. Max let out a happy bark, his tail thumping loudly against the marble floor as Isabelle reached the bottom step. She stopped smoothly in front of Daniel, catching the stunned, silent admiration radiating from his expression. She reached up, her fingers lightly smoothing the lapel of her tailored charcoal jacket. A tiny, victorious smirk graced her lips. "You are staring, Your Majesty," Isabelle noted, her sweet jasmine and crushed blackberry scent mingling flawlessly with his warm mahogany. "Rate the sartorial choice. Be honest." Daniel finally exhaled, offering her his arm. That delta is a definitive 10. Chapter 17. The grand ballroom of the royal palace hummed with the lively chatter of hundreds of aristocratic guests. High above, crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden illumination over the polished marble floor. Isabelle Fletcher stood at the grand entrance archway, pausing to survey the spectacle. She casually patted the interior breast pocket of her custom-tailored charcoal suit, feeling the reassuring weight of her heavily encrypted satellite tablet and her silver engraved tactical pen. She refused to leave her equipment behind, knowing danger rarely respected a dress code. Beside her, King Daniel adjusted the cuffs of his pristine midnight black tuxedo. The garment emphasized his broad shoulders, while his silver signet ring caught the ambient light. The rich, inviting scent of warm mahogany and clove radiated from him, projecting a quiet dominance over the entire space. Max the direwolf sat obediently by Daniel's leg, his massive, silver-tipped frame adorned with a red velvet bow tie that looked entirely ridiculous against his lethal fangs. These pampered nobles are going to stare and whisper, Isabelle thought, maintaining a perfectly neutral expression. They expect a delicate royal consort draped in silk, not a pragmatic Delta tactical auditor wearing trousers. I must prepare for verbal hostility. Daniel offered her his arm, leaning in slightly. "Ready to face the wolves in sheep's clothing?" he asked, his dark eyes sparkling with genuine amusement. "I evaluate fatal threats for a living, Daniel," Isabelle replied, resting her hand lightly on his tailored sleeve. "I can handle a few judgmental aristocrats." As they descended the short flight of stairs into the main hall, the ambient chatter plummeted into a shocked silence. Hundreds of eyes locked onto Isabelle. Whispers ignited through the crowd like dry kindling. "They are judging her attire instead of recognizing her worth," Daniel noted, a fierce, protective surge flaring deep in his chest. They cannot comprehend a woman who relies on immense competence rather than decorative frills. A portly nobleman named Lord Harrington stepped forward, sipping aggressively from a crystal flute. He looked Isabelle up and down, his nose wrinkling in visible distaste. "Sire," Harrington drawled, his voice carrying over the tense room, "we anticipated you would bring a lady to the diplomatic gala. It appears your guest forgot her gown in the military barracks." A few scattered snickers rippled through the nearby aristocratic crowd. Isabelle did not flinch. She simply smoothed the lapel of her charcoal jacket, her sweet jasmine and crushed blackberry scent remaining perfectly steady. A basic, uninspired intimidation tactic, she analyzed swiftly, rating the verbal insult a miserable 2 out of 10. He lacks originality, and any real tactical finesse. He possesses the intellect of a blunt stone, Daniel thought, fighting a sudden urge to strike the offending nobleman. Actually, Lord Harrington, Isabelle interjected smoothly, her voice ringing clear and authoritative, since I have you here in a social setting, my initial review of your sector's agricultural tax returns shows a 15% discrepancy. Perhaps you should spend less time evaluating my tailoring and more time balancing your fraudulent ledgers. Harrington sputtered, his face turning a vibrant shade of crimson as the surrounding nobles gasped. Before Harrington could mount a defense, Daniel stepped forward. He simply let his alpha aura expand, sending a heavy wave of power sweeping over the room. Delta Fletcher secured our western borders less than 24 hours ago, Daniel stated, his deep voice carrying a lethal edge. She is wearing the garments of a brilliant warrior and an equal. You, Harrington, are wearing lavish silk financed by my treasury. Choose your next words with extreme caution. Sensing the sudden shift in aggression, Max the direwolf decided to participate. The beast stepped directly in front of Isabelle, baring teeth like daggers, and let out a low, vibrating growl that rattled the crystal glasses on the nearby catering tables. The remaining whispers vanished instantly. The room fell into a terrified, respectful silence. Excellent, Daniel murmured softly, offering his arm to Isabelle once more. Now, I believe the string quartet is playing our song. Chapter 18. The string quartet situated on the elevated balcony transitioned into a sweeping, elegant waltz. Daniel guided Isabelle past the terrified aristocrats and directly onto the center of the polished marble dance floor. He placed his right hand firmly on the small of her back, his touch radiating a comforting heat through the fine fabric of her charcoal suit jacket. He took her left hand in his, intertwining their fingers with practiced grace. Isabelle stepped into the rhythm, her black leather boots gliding smoothly over the floor. Despite her initial reluctance to participate in the pageantry, she followed his lead flawlessly. This physical proximity is severely compromising my objectivity, Isabelle noted, forcing herself to focus on the surrounding crowd instead of the warmth of his hands. I must maintain a secure perimeter. You are evaluating the emergency exits, aren't you? Daniel asked softly, spinning her gracefully to the music. I am assessing the structural integrity of the room and the defensive lines, Isabelle corrected, keeping her voice low. It is a deeply ingrained professional habit. I cannot simply turn it off because a cello is playing. She is relentlessly vigilant, Daniel thought, a profound sense of admiration washing over him as he guided her through the sea of nobles. While the rest of my court drinks expensive champagne and gossips, she is actively hunting for vulnerabilities. Isabelle continued to scan the room over his broad shoulder. Her mind operated like a high-powered surveillance system. Prior to descending the stairs, she had meticulously memorized the official guest registry and the staff manifests from the Royal Archives. Every face she passed was cross-referenced against that mental database. Suddenly, her gaze locked onto the far side of the ballroom. 4 men were clustered near the heavy wooden catering doors. They wore standard palace livery, but their physical demeanor was completely wrong for service staff. Those men are leaning heavily into their dominant shoulders, Isabelle realized, her pulse accelerating as she recognized the combative stance she had critiqued in Daniel just yesterday. Wait, they are not carrying serving trays or clearing tables. Their hands are hovering purposefully near their waistbands. Isabelle immediately tightened her grip on Daniel's hand, halting her graceful movements. Daniel, she murmured, her sweet jasmine scent spiking sharply with sudden adrenaline. 3 o'clock. By the catering doors. There are 4 men present who are not on the official registry. Daniel did not break the rhythm of the waltz, seamlessly pivoting them to face the opposite direction so he could discreetly glance over his shoulder. "Are you certain?" he asked, his warm mahogany scent shifting to a darker, defensive tone. The guards vetted every single servant before the event began. "I memorized the staff ledger an hour ago," Isabelle confirmed, her eyes narrowing as she calculated the distance between the intruders and the royal guards. "They do not belong in this palace. Their posture is tactical, not subservient. We have a severe security breach." "I have trusted my security forces for too long," Daniel realized, a cold wave of fury settling over his chest. If she had not memorized those mundane files, we would be completely blind right now. Before Daniel could signal his royal guards across the room, the 4 disguised men exchanged a rapid series of nods. They reached under their pristine white serving vests and simultaneously drew long, serrated hunting blades. The polished steel gleamed menacingly under the crystal chandeliers. The nearest noblewoman caught sight of the drawn weapons and let out a piercing, terrified scream that shattered the elegant music. The lavish diplomatic gala had instantly transformed into a deadly trap. Chapter 19. Total chaos erupted within the grand ballroom. The elegant string quartet abandoned their instruments, scrambling for the balcony exits. Aristocrats shrieked, shoving each other aside in a frantic, disorganized stampede toward the main doors. The sudden panic created a dense, impassable human barrier, preventing the stationed royal guards from reaching the center of the room where the Alpha King stood. The 4 armed assassins did not hesitate. They lunged straight into the fray, their eyes locked singularly on Daniel. Shifting into their wolf forms would take exactly 10 seconds and destroy their clothing, costing them precious momentum and their concealed weapons. They chose to fight in their human forms, utilizing their enhanced speed and lethal blades. "Stay behind me!" Daniel roared, his deep voice cutting through the terrified screams. He dropped his refined posture entirely, his muscles coiling as he prepared to intercept the first attacker. Isabelle completely ignored his command. She reached swiftly into her tailored suit jacket, her fingers wrapping around her silver-engraved tactical pen. She clicked the heavy metallic mechanism, locking the point into place. "He still foolishly believes I require his protection," Isabelle thought, sidestepping smoothly to cover his exposed left flank. "I will simply have to demonstrate my value in the field once again." The first assassin slashed horizontally toward Daniel's chest. The Alpha King dodged the lethal arc with blinding speed, delivering a devastating punch to the man's ribs. The bone cracked audibly over the din of the crowd, and Daniel ruthlessly twisted the assassin's wrist, disarming the blade before kicking him firmly to the marble floor. Simultaneously, a second attacker targeted Isabelle, severely underestimating the woman in the charcoal suit. He thrust his knife toward her stomach. Isabelle executed a flawless, practiced pivot. She knocked the incoming blade aside with her forearm and drove her silver tactical pen viciously into the nerve cluster of his bicep. The man hollered in agony, dropping his weapon instantly as his arm went numb. "I must conserve my energy for the secondary wave," Isabelle analyzed rapidly, pulling her pen free and stepping back into a defensive stance. "These 4 are merely a distraction." "She fights with the precise, calculated rhythm of a seasoned veteran," Daniel observed, catching a glimpse of her takedown as he parried another strike. "We are moving in perfect tandem. It is a terrifyingly beautiful synchronization." Across the room, Max, the direwolf, was having a miserable time. The giant beast was deeply spooked by a crashing tray of crystal champagne flutes. He let out a loud, pathetic whine and attempted to scramble beneath a long catering table covered in a white linen cloth. As he scrambled frantically for cover, his massive body accidentally collided with the legs of the third assassin. The attacker tripped over the terrified direwolf, flailing wildly before crashing face first into a towering ice sculpture of a swan. The sculpture shattered into 100 pieces, sending heavy chunks of frozen water cascading over the unconscious man. Even in his cowardice, the beast provides excellent crowd control, Daniel noted, delivering a swift kick to a downed attacker. Your pet actually proved useful, Isabelle called out, her breathing steady as she surveyed the remaining threats. She smoothed the front of her jacket, refusing to let the exertion show. Do not encourage him. It was a sheer accident, Daniel replied, standing back to back with her. Their brief moment of victory was abruptly severed. The heavy wooden doors leading to the kitchen corridors burst open. A dozen more armed rogues flooded into the ballroom, their aggressive scents polluting the air. Isabelle rapidly calculated the numbers, her analytical mind processing the overwhelming disadvantage. We need a tactical retreat, Daniel. There are too many for a direct, static confrontation. Daniel surveyed the incoming wave, his jaw tightening with frustration. Through the east arches, he commanded, grabbing her hand. We fall back to the Royal Library. Chapter 20. They bolted toward the east arches, weaving through the remnants of the terrified crowd. Daniel maintained a crushing grip on Isabelle's hand, pulling her toward the dimly lit corridors of the palace's private wing. Max the direwolf, deeply panicked by the severity of the situation, abandoned his hiding spot beneath the catering table and sprinted blindly down a side corridor toward the exterior gardens, his red velvet bow tie askew. The heavy footsteps of a dozen armed assassins echoed loudly behind them, their aggressive shouts bouncing off the high, vaulted ceilings. Isabelle did not look back. She focused entirely on maintaining her swift pace, her black leather boots gripping the polished stone floors with every desperate stride. We are forfeiting the primary battlefield, Isabelle analyzed, her pulse hammering a frantic, erratic rhythm against her throat. But retreating to a defensible bottleneck is our only logical option for survival. We must secure a fortified position immediately. They rounded a sharp corner, bursting into the grand foyer that housed the Royal Library. The library entrance featured massive, intricate mahogany doors, towering 12 feet high. However, Isabelle immediately noted a critical structural flaw as they approached. The doors were ancient and heavily stylized, designed for aesthetic grandeur rather than security. They possessed decorative brass handles, but there was no internal locking mechanism. "There is no lock!" Isabelle shouted, skidding to a halt inside the vast, moonlit library. The room smelled of old paper and rich leather, a stark contrast to the metallic scent of impending violence. This library offers zero tactical advantages besides the sturdy walls, Isabelle realized, her eyes darting across the towering wooden shelves. We are boxed in. Daniel spun around, his sharp eyes scanning the immediate vicinity. Just outside the library entrance, resting upon a sturdy granite pedestal, sat a heavy, solid marble bust of a historical king. It was a massive piece of decorative art, weighing well over 100 pounds. If I cannot lock the door, I will build a wall, Daniel decided swiftly, his competitive drive refusing to accept defeat. I will not let them breach the sanctuary while I still draw breath. Get inside and stay clear of the entrance, Daniel ordered. He rushed toward the granite pedestal, his pristine tuxedo jacket straining dangerously across his broad shoulders as he wrapped his arms around the solid marble bust. With a grunt of sheer, brute force, he hoisted the massive stone sculpture off its base. He carried it into the library, hauling the heavy mahogany doors shut behind him. He wedged the solid marble bust forcefully beneath the intricate brass handles, angling it perfectly against the floorboards to create an immovable, makeshift barricade. I will not let them harm her, even if I have to tear the palace down, Daniel vowed silently as he backed away from the sealed entrance. Seconds later, a tremendous impact rattled the wood. The assassins threw their collective weight against the doors, but the marble bust held firm, preventing the handles from turning and the heavy wood from opening. Daniel backed away further, his chest heaving as he stared at the vibrating doors. He ran a hand through his dark hair, the adrenaline slowly beginning to ebb, leaving a profound physical exhaustion in its wake. He turned to face Isabelle. She stood near a large reading table, her silver tactical pen still gripped tightly in her hand. The moonlight filtering through the tall glass windows illuminated her sharp features and the flawless tailoring of her charcoal suit. Despite the frantic retreat, she looked incredibly composed. "We are temporarily secure," Isabelle stated, her sweet jasmine scent cutting through the dusty air of the library. "The barricade will hold against physical force, provided they do not locate heavy breaching tools." Daniel closed the distance between them, the lingering tension of the battle shifting into something entirely different within the quiet, isolated room. He reached out, gently prying the silver pen from her fingers and setting it on the reading table. "We are trapped in a locked room again, Delta," Daniel murmured, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "It seems to be our defining pattern." Chapter 21. The library was cloaked in heavy shadows, save for the pale moonlight spilling through the tall glass panes. Outside the massive mahogany doors, the muted thuds of the assassins battering the wood echoed like a steady, menacing drum. The 100-pound solid marble bust held firmly beneath the intricate brass handles, preventing the attackers from breaching the quiet sanctuary. Daniel leaned back against the towering bookshelves. He reached up, aggressively rolling the sleeves of his pristine midnight black tuxedo past his elbows, heedless of the luxurious fabric tearing slightly at the seams. His breathing was heavy, mingling his warm mahogany and clove scent with the musty aroma of ancient parchment. "I am the ruler of a vast territory, yet my most vital treasure is currently cornered in a dusty room," Daniel thought, his dark eyes tracking Isabelle across the floor. "I must ensure she walks out of here unscathed, even if it requires forfeiting my own life." Isabelle stood near the center reading table, her silver tactical pen gripped loosely in her hand. Her custom-tailored charcoal suit remained remarkably pristine, though the deep sapphire silk shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. Her pulse thrummed a rapid, steady rhythm against her neck, a stark contrast to the calm exterior she actively projected. "My tactical options are severely limited," Isabelle calculated, smoothing the front of her jacket out of pure habit. "We are fortified, but a static defense eventually crumbles without reinforcements. We need an alternative." "Rate our current defensive position, Delta," Daniel murmured, his deep voice carrying a strange softness that defied the violence occurring just beyond the door. 4 out of 10, Isabelle replied, her sweet jasmine and crushed blackberries fragrance blooming in the confined space. "The marble bust is sturdy, but those mahogany doors are centuries old. The wood will splinter if they locate a heavy ram. We require a secondary exit strategy." Daniel pushed away from the bookshelf, closing the physical distance between them. He did not look toward the rattling doors. His focus was wholly consumed by the pragmatic, hyper-competent woman standing before him. He stopped just inches away, the heat of his large frame radiating against her suit jacket. "She analyzes the structural integrity of the wood, while I am solely focused on the structural integrity of my own heart," Daniel mused, a quiet, growing realization of perfect compatibility settling deep within his chest. The wager was a foolish game. I do not want a temporary victory. I want her. Forget the secondary exit for a moment, Daniel said, reaching out to gently pry the silver pen from her fingers. He placed it carefully on the reading table. I am exhausted by the constant performance, Isabelle. The royal court, the treacherous nobles, the endless posturing. I am surrounded by sycophants who agree with every word I say. It is a lonely, hollow existence. Isabelle looked up into his dark eyes, her breath catching slightly in her throat. The arrogant Alpha King had vanished. In his place stood a vulnerable man, offering her a raw, unfiltered truth. I do not want you here merely as a tactical advisor, Daniel confessed, his thumb lightly grazing the curve of her jawline. I want you as my equal. I want a partner brave enough to challenge my decisions, correct my combat stances, and spill coffee on my pristine maps. I want you. He is laying his crown at my feet, Isabelle realized, the formidable walls around her heart finally crumbling into dust. The logic is undeniable. The bond is a real, tangible tether between us. You are highly demanding, incredibly stubborn, and you drive like a maniac, Isabelle whispered, a genuine smile gracing her sharp features. She stepped closer, sliding her hands up the crisp fabric of his tuxedo shirt. But you also respect my mind. You shielded me from your own counsel. You gave my pack hope. The heavy thudding against the doors faded into the background as Daniel leaned down. Isabelle met him halfway, capturing his lips in a fierce, demanding kiss that easily surpassed any number on her scale. It was a mutual surrender, a seamless locking of a true mate bond. Chapter 22. The profound silence of their shared confession was violently shattered. A deafening crack echoed through the vast room as the center panel of the massive mahogany doors finally buckled. The assassins had acquired a heavy iron candelabra from the corridor, utilizing it as a makeshift battering ram. Isabelle instantly stepped back from Daniel's embrace, her romantic haze vanishing into thin air. She snatched her silver-engraved tactical pen from the reading table, locking the point into place with a sharp click. Her charcoal suit jacket shifted smoothly as she assumed a defensive stance. The perimeter is compromised, Isabelle calculated swiftly, her pulse accelerating to a rapid, steady cadence. We are trapped with no external reinforcements. I must target their joints to prevent them from coordinating a synchronized attack. Daniel moved seamlessly to her side, his midnight black tuxedo stark against the pale moonlight. He rolled his sleeves up an inch further, his jaw set in a rigid line. The fine fabric of his trousers pulled tight as he widened his stance, prepared to defend his newly recognized mate at all costs. I will tear them apart with my bare hands before I let a single blade touch her, Daniel vowed silently, his dark eyes tracking the splintering wood. My kingdom will drown in their blood for this trespass. Aim for the knees and wrists, Daniel instructed softly, his warm mahogany scent spiking with lethal aggression. Disable their mobility. We cannot afford a prolonged engagement. With a final thunderous crash, the intricate brass handles gave way. The solid marble bust screeched against the polished floorboards, pushed aside by the sheer force of a dozen armed rogues pouring into the royal library. They gripped serrated hunting blades, their eyes locked fiercely on the Alpha King. Before the leading attacker could even raise his weapon, an explosive sound erupted from the opposite side of the room. The towering glass windows lining the exterior wall shattered into thousands of jagged, glittering fragments. A massive, silver-tipped beast launched itself through the rain of broken glass, landing heavily atop a wooden reading table. It was Max the direwolf. He had somehow navigated to the exterior gardens during the chaotic retreat, and his ostentatious red velvet bow tie was now dusted with shimmering glass. Max did not look like a massive coward in this specific moment. Standing the size of a small horse, with teeth like daggers gleaming in the moonlight, he looked like a mythical monster summoned straight from a nightmare. He actually came back for us, Isabelle thought, a spark of genuine astonishment cutting through her intense focus. The oversized lapdog is executing a flanking maneuver. Max let out a booming, chest-rattling roar that shook the remaining glass panes. He lunged off the table, crashing directly into the cluster of assassins. He did not bite them. His cowardly nature still prevented lethal force. Instead, he simply used his 300-pound bulk like a furry wrecking ball, bowling over 5 armed men in a single clumsy sweep. The attackers shrieked in sheer terror, completely disorganized by the sudden appearance of the giant direwolf. Weapons clattered uselessly to the floor as they scrambled to avoid being crushed beneath his massive paws. He is a terrible guard dog, but an exceptional distraction, Daniel realized, seizing the golden opportunity without hesitation. I will feed him the finest steaks in the kingdom for a month. Now! Daniel roared. He surged forward, closing the distance while the rogues were disoriented. He delivered a brutal, sweeping kick to the nearest assassin's knee, snapping the joint with clinical efficiency. Isabelle flanked him perfectly. She ducked beneath a wild slash from a panicking rogue, driving her silver pen sharply into the man's thigh. The library transformed into a chaotic brawl, but the tide had definitively turned. Max continued to bound around the room, whining loudly while accidentally neutralizing the enemy beneath his sheer size. Chapter 23. The chaotic brawl inside the Royal Library concluded swiftly. Disoriented by Max's massive, clumsy rampage and systematically dismantled by Daniel and Isabelle's synchronized combat, the surviving assassins threw down their blades in surrender. Minutes later, a contingent of heavily armed royal guards finally breached the room, aggressively securing the treacherous rogues in heavy iron bindings. Isabelle stood near the shattered glass windows, the cool night breeze ruffling her deep sapphire silk shirt. She wiped a smudge of dust from the lapel of her custom-tailored charcoal suit, her breathing gradually returning to a normal rhythm. Despite the violent skirmish, she projected an aura of unyielding competence. The immediate threat is neutralized, but my primary objective remains unfulfilled, Isabelle reasoned, sliding her silver tactical pen back into her pocket. My pack is still starving. I must secure the formal paperwork before the adrenaline fades. Daniel approached her, his pristine midnight black tuxedo now bearing several scuff marks and a torn lapel. He carried the distinct scent of warm mahogany and clove, completely unbothered by his ruined attire. He reached out, gently brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. "The palace is fully secured," Daniel announced, his deep voice resonant in the damaged room. "The vanguard is currently sweeping the outer perimeter to ensure no secondary factions are hiding in the courtyard. You are safe." "I was never particularly worried about my personal safety," Isabelle replied, offering a brief, pragmatic shrug. "However, the integrity of these ancient books is severely compromised. The cleanup will be a staggering financial burden." She just fought off a dozen armed men, yet she is evaluating the property damage, Daniel thought, a broad, genuine smile breaking across his bruised face. She is a magnificent anomaly. "Let the royal treasury handle the cleaning fees," Daniel said, offering her his hand. "We have far more pressing matters to attend to. Follow me." They departed the ruined library, stepping over the displaced marble bust, and navigated the quiet, heavily guarded corridors back to Daniel's private office. Max trotted happily behind them, his red velvet bow tie still glittering with glass dust, oblivious to the destruction he had caused. Once inside the lavish office, Daniel reached for the manual sliding brass lock, shoving it firmly into place with a loud metallic click. He bypassed the dried coffee stain on his parchment map, which the maids had clearly been too terrified to touch, and moved straight to a heavy iron safe embedded in the wall. He retrieved a thick roll of official royal parchment and laid it flat across the clean side of the desk. "Your pack requires immediate resources and permanent border security," Daniel stated, retrieving a golden quill from his drawer. "This is a binding military treaty. It bypasses the council and grants your territory full access to my vanguard and our agricultural surplus." Isabelle stepped forward, her eyes scanning the elegant calligraphy. It was exactly what she had traveled across the continent to obtain. It meant survival for her people. It meant she had succeeded. He is signing away massive royal assets without demanding a single concession in return, Isabelle noted, a sudden tightness gripping her throat. "It is the most irrational, beautiful tactical decision I have ever witnessed." Daniel scrawled his bold signature across the bottom of the parchment, sealing it with a press of his silver signet ring. He rolled the document carefully and handed it to her. "Your borders are officially secure, Delta," Daniel murmured, his dark eyes locking onto hers with intense sincerity. "No more scavenging in the shadows. Your people will thrive." Isabelle accepted the heavy parchment, holding it tightly against her chest. "Thank you, Daniel. This is highly efficient leadership." "I aim to please," Daniel replied softly. Chapter 24. The Grand Royal Office was suffocatingly warm, courtesy of the modern gas fireplace running silently against the far wall. Operated exclusively by a brushed metal wall switch, the appliance provided a steady, comforting heat without a single glowing ember to tend. Several weeks had passed since the diplomatic gala ambush, and the palace had settled into a new, far more efficient rhythm. Isabelle Fletcher stood near the massive oak desk, wearing her standard tactical gear, charcoal gray cargo pants, a fitted navy Henley, and scuff-resistant combat boots. She held her heavily encrypted satellite tablet, swiping through the latest agricultural delivery manifests bound for her home pack. The immense relief of knowing her people were safe and well-fed had softened the sharp edges of her pragmatic nature. "The supply lines are functioning with 98% efficiency," Isabelle calculated, a genuine smile curving her lips as she reviewed the data. "The integration of our forces has been remarkably seamless, and working alongside the Alpha King is surprisingly pleasant." Daniel leaned casually against the edge of the desk, watching her work. He wore a simple, tailored black button-down shirt, having finally abandoned the formal jackets during their private strategy sessions. His sleeves were aggressively rolled up to his elbows, displaying his corded forearms. The rich, inviting scent of warm mahogany and clove filled the quiet room. Max the direwolf lay sprawled across the expensive rug near the fireplace. The massive, silver-tipped beast was snoring loudly, his giant paws twitching as he chased imaginary rabbits in his sleep. "The grain shipments arrived at your western border 3 hours ahead of schedule," Daniel noted, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "My logistics commanders are terrified of receiving a poor rating from you." "They earned a solid 8, Isabelle replied, tapping the biometric scanner to turn the tablet screen dark. She slipped the device into her left thigh pocket and looked up at him. Their routing was adequate, but they took a wider turn near the ridge than necessary. Efficiency can always be improved. "She demands perfection from my military, and they happily deliver it," Daniel mused, a fierce surge of pride warming his blood. "She has transformed this territory simply by existing within it." Daniel pushed off the edge of the desk, slowly closing the distance between them. He did not bother with pretense or arrogant posturing. He simply stepped into her personal space, his dark eyes locked firmly onto hers. He reached out, gently capturing her waist and pulling her flush against his solid frame. Your pack is thriving, the rogues are imprisoned, and the council is too terrified of you to complain, Daniel murmured, his deep voice dropping to a dangerous, velvety purr. The audit is officially concluded, Isabelle, which brings us to an unresolved issue. Isabelle tilted her head back, resting her hands flat against his chest. She could feel the steady, reassuring thrum of his heartbeat beneath the fine cotton. Are you still fixated on that ridiculous wager, Your Majesty? I am fixated on my performance review, Daniel corrected playfully, leaning his face down until his lips hovered mere inches from hers. We have established a formal partnership. We share a territory, but as a partner, I demand to know my final score. His ego is still a towering fortress, but I am perfectly happy residing within it, Isabelle thought, sliding her arms up to wrap securely around his neck. The logic is flawless. The bond is permanent. Isabelle leaned in, capturing his mouth in a slow, deeply satisfying kiss. There was no rush, no frantic adrenaline, only a profound, undeniable connection that solidified their mate bond. When she finally pulled back, she smoothed the collar of his black shirt, her sweet jasmine scent wrapping around him. 10, Isabelle whispered into the quiet, locked room. A flawless 10. The end. Quick favor, don't go anywhere yet. If you thought Isabelle was brave for looking the Alpha King in the eye and grading his kiss a 6 out of 10, wait until you meet the heroine in this next story on your screen. You have to hear this disaster unfold. Click the video on your screen right now. It is pure, unhinged chaos.